My name is Monica, and I was born into a family of musical theater actors. You'd think that would mean a life full of drama and excitement, but for me, it mostly meant a childhood of waiting. Waiting for my parents to come home, waiting for them to take me with them, waiting for the day they'd give up their careers and finally be real parents to me. I grew up with my grandparents, my mom's parents. They were good people, don't get me wrong. They took care of me, made sure I had everything I needed. But they weren't my parents, you know? My grandfather, he had this restaurant. It wasn't just any old place, it had this unique retro-style interior that people loved. The business did well, brought in good money. So yeah, I grew up in nice conditions. But my grandparents, they were careful not to spoil me. They took my upbringing seriously. My parents? They were always on tour with their theater troupe. At least, that's what they told me. They'd call sometimes, but not often. When they did come home, it was more like a visit. They'd swing by, give me some gifts, ask how I was doing. But they never took me home with them. It was always, next time, Monica, we promise. Even when they had breaks or vacations, they'd leave me with my grandparents. We need rest, they'd say. We need some free time. Always with the promise that things would change soon. That they'd give up their careers and come for me. That we'd be a real family. As I grew older, I started to notice things. The way my grandmother would purse her lips when my parents' names were mentioned. The way my grandfather's eyes would harden when he talked about their tours. They're busy people, Monica, my grandmother would say, but her tone suggested she didn't quite believe it herself. I tried to focus on the good things. My grandparents' love, the bustling restaurant, the comfortable life we had. But there was always that hole, that emptiness where my parents should have been. I'd watch other kids with their moms and dads, going to the park, having ice cream, doing all those normal family things. And I'd wonder, what was wrong with me? Why didn't my parents want to do those things with me? But I never stopped hoping. Never stopped believing that one day, they'd keep their promise. That one day, we'd be a real family. My 12th birthday started like a dream come true. For once, my parents were actually here, showering me with attention and gifts. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw them walk through the door, their faces beaming with smiles I'd only seen in old photographs. Monica, sweetheart. Mom called out, arms wide open. I ran to her, breathing in her familiar perfume. Mom, Dad. You're really here. Dad ruffled my hair affectionately. Wouldn't miss it for the world, kiddo. Happy birthday. We spent the entire day together, doing all the things I'd always imagined doing with my parents. We went to the local amusement park, had ice cream, and they even sat through my impromptu piano recital without checking their phones once. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had real parents, not just occasional visitors. As the day wound down and we returned to my grandparents' house, I couldn't stop grinning. This was it, I thought. This was the day everything would change. Time for bed, Monica, Grandma said gently. It's been a big day. I didn't want it to end, but I was exhausted. Okay, Grandma. Mom, Dad, you'll still be here tomorrow, right? They exchanged a quick glance before Dad answered, of course, sweetheart. We'll see you in the morning. I went to bed that night feeling like the luckiest girl in the world. But my happiness was short-lived. About an hour later, I woke up thirsty. As I crept downstairs to get some water, I heard raised voices coming from Grandpa's office. Curiosity got the better of me, and I inched closer to the door. How dare you? Grandpa's voice boomed. You abandoned your daughter for years, and you still haven't taken her home as you promised. Dad, please, Mom's voice, usually so controlled, sounded shrill. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, Grandpa cut her off. I gave you money to start that eco-village of yours. The condition was that you'd take Monica and be a proper family. But you're not even working as actors anymore, are you? No more tours, just excuses. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. No more tours? But they'd always said. We never wanted her in the first place. Mom's scream made me flinch. I didn't want to give birth to her. It was you who insisted we keep her instead of having an abortion. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. They never wanted me? Mom continued, her voice dripping with venom. Monica always got in the way. I've never felt any love for that child. Do you know how much I sacrificed? My figure, my career, everything. I stood there, frozen, as my world crumbled around me. The perfect day I'd just experienced felt like a cruel joke now. My father's voice suddenly cut through the chaos. Look, he said, his tone eerily calm, let's not pretend I'm any better here. I didn't want Monica to be born either. I dreamed of living my own life, free from responsibilities. A child was never part of the plan. I felt my knees go weak. Even Dad, who I'd always thought was the more caring of the two, didn't want me. I had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. Grandpa's voice, filled with disappointment and anger, responded, I had hoped that over time, you'd both come to your senses. That you'd stop being so damn selfish. I thought having Monica would soften your hearts, make you more responsible. But clearly, I was wrong. Oh, spare us the lecture. Mom spat back. Stay out of our lives and leave everything as it is. You wanted a granddaughter so badly? Fine. You raise her yourself. There was a moment of tense silence before Grandpa spoke again, his voice cold and final. All right, if that's how you want it. But don't expect another cent from me for your harebrained schemes. Find another investor for your precious eco-village. I'm done. I heard footsteps approaching and panicked. Quickly, I ducked behind a nearby sofa, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. The office door flew open, and I saw my parents storm out through a gap between the sofa and the floor. They slammed the front door so hard the windows rattled. Through the curtains, I watched their car speed away, not even a glance back at the house. Once I was sure the coast was clear, I crept back up to my room. As soon as I closed my bedroom door, the tears I'd been holding back came flooding out. I buried my face in my pillow to muffle my sobs. How could they? How could my parents, the people I'd idolized and longed for all my life, not want me? The perfect day we just had felt like a cruel joke now. I cried all night, my pillow soaked with tears. By morning, my eyes were puffy and red, my throat raw from crying. When Grandma knocked on my door to wake me up, I managed to croak out that I wasn't feeling well. Oh, sweetheart, she said, coming in to feel my forehead. You do feel a bit warm. Must be all the excitement yesterday. You just rest, okay? I nodded weakly, feeling guilty for the lie, but knowing I couldn't face them right now. How could I look at my grandparents knowing what I knew? How could I pretend everything was normal when my whole world had been turned upside down? That day marked the end of my childhood innocence. The fantasy of a happy family reunion was shattered, replaced by the harsh reality of my parents' true feelings. I knew I could never look at them the same way again. 3 years passed since that fateful birthday, and I'd learned to live with the knowledge I'd gained that night. I never told my grandparents what I'd overheard, and they continued to shower me with love and support. Life went on, and I tried my best to focus on school and helping out in the restaurant, pushing thoughts of my parents to the back of my mind. Then, just after my 15th birthday, everything changed again. I was in history class when the principal came to get me. The look on his face told me something was terribly wrong before he even opened his mouth. Monica, there's been an accident, he said gently. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as he explained. A train derailment. My grandparents were gone. Just like that. The next few days passed in a blur of black clothes and sympathetic murmurs. I felt numb, unable to process the loss of the two people who'd been my real parents in every way that mattered. Then, to my shock, my actual parents showed up at the funeral. They didn't even try to hide their lack of grief, their eyes dry and their voices steady as they made arrangements. "Well, I suppose we should take the girl," I overheard my mother say to my father, as if I was some piece of furniture they had to deal with. And just like that, I found myself moving into their home. To my surprise, they were almost nice. They gave me my own room, let me pick out furniture I liked. For a moment, I dared to hope. Maybe losing my grandparents had made them realize what was important. Maybe they'd changed. "Look, Monica," my mother said one evening, her voice uncharacteristically gentle, "I know we haven't always been there for you. But we want to make it right. This is a fresh start for all of us." I wanted to believe her. I really did. For a few weeks, everything seemed perfect. They asked about my day, helped with my homework, even sat down for family dinners. It was everything I'd ever wanted. But then I started noticing things. Hushed arguments when they thought I was asleep. Tense phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. One night, unable to sleep, I crept downstairs for a glass of water and overheard them in the kitchen. "This is your fault," my mother hissed. "If you hadn't insisted on that ridiculous meditation yurt, we might actually be turning a profit by now." "My fault?" my father shot back. "Who was it that wanted to import those overpriced organic cotton sheets? Face it, you're as much to blame for this mess as I am." I froze on the stairs, listening as they tore into each other, accusing each other of incompetence and poor decision-making. It became clear that their eco-village, the business they'd chosen over raising me, was failing. "And now we're stuck with the girl," my mother spat. "I thought at least we'd get a decent inheritance from her grandparents, but it's nowhere near what we need to save this place." My heart sank. Of course. The sudden affection, the desire for a fresh start, it was all about money. They'd hoped my grandparents had left them a fortune, and now they were disappointed. I crept back to my room, feeling like a fool for ever believing things had changed. The perfect family I'd glimpsed these past few weeks was just another illusion, as false as all their promises had been over the years. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of my new room, I realized that nothing had really changed. My parents were still the same selfish people they'd always been. The only difference was that now, I didn't have my grandparents to shield me from that reality. The months following my grandparents' death were a roller coaster of emotions and changes. One day, I came home from school to find my parents in a heated discussion about finances. "We have no choice," my father said, his voice strained. "We need to sell the house and the restaurant." My heart sank. "But, that's all I have left of them," I protested weakly. My mother's eyes were cold as she replied, "Don't be sentimental, Monica. It's just property." And just like that, my childhood home and my grandfather's beloved restaurant were sold off. I watched as strangers carted away the antique furniture, the family photos, the memories. My parents assured me it was for the best, that the money would save their eco-village business. But I knew better than to believe their promises by now. As the months wore on, their facade of affection crumbled completely. They bickered constantly, not even bothering to lower their voices when I was around anymore. I tried to tune it out, focusing instead on my studies. Despite everything, I managed to excel in school, even graduating early at 17. I was proud of myself, but when I broached the subject of college with my parents, their response was like a bucket of cold water. "College?" my mother scoffed. "Do you have any idea how much that costs? We can barely keep the business afloat as it is." But Grandpa always said he'd set aside money for my education," I said, my voice small. My father laughed mirthlessly. "Your grandfather said a lot of things, Monica. But there's no money." It was probably just another one of his empty promises. I wanted to argue, to insist that my grandfather would never lie to me. But I had no proof, no way to access any accounts he might have set up. And that's how I found myself working at the local coffee shop, taking orders and wiping down tables instead of sitting in college lectures. It wasn't what I'd dreamed of, but it was something. A start. A way to save up and maybe, just maybe, fund my own education one day. The months ticked by, and before I knew it, my 18th birthday arrived. I woke up that morning with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Maybe now that I was legally an adult, things would change. Maybe my parents would finally see me as a person, not just a burden. But as I came downstairs, I was met with the same indifference I'd grown accustomed to. No cake, no cards, not even a happy birthday. "Oh, is that today?" my mother said absently when I reminded her. "Well, have a good day at work, dear." I left the house with a heavy heart, trying to hold back tears as I made my way to the coffee shop. But to my surprise, I was greeted with streamers and a small cake when I arrived. "Happy birthday, Monica," my boss and coworkers chorused. For the first time that day, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. As we shared cake and laughs during our break, I realized something important. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes, it's about the people who show up for you, who celebrate your victories, and support you through your struggles. The day after my underwhelming 18th birthday, I was at work, mechanically wiping down tables and taking orders, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Monica?" a professional-sounding voice asked. "This is Robert Johnson, your grandfather's lawyer. I need to meet with you regarding your grandfather's will. Can you come to my office today?" In a daze, I got permission from my boss to leave early and made my way to the lawyer's office. As I sat across from Mr. Johnson, I couldn't have prepared myself for what he was about to say. "Your grandfather left you a substantial inheritance, Monica," he said, sliding a document across the desk. "He set up a personal account for you, which you now have access to as you've turned 18. Additionally, he left a separate fund for your college education and living expenses." I stared at the numbers on the paper, my vision blurring with tears. It was more money than I'd ever imagined. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope, of possibility. When I got home, I found my parents in their usual spots, Mom scrolling through her phone, Dad watching TV. They barely looked up as I entered. Taking a deep breath, I announced, "Grandpa left me money for college." The reaction was immediate. They both jumped to their feet, eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" my mother shrieked. "How much?" I told them the amount, watching as their expressions morphed from shock to calculation. "Well," my mother said, her voice suddenly honey-sweet, "that explains why we inherited so little. Your grandfather always did favor you." I bristled at her tone, but pressed on. "I'm going to apply to colleges. With my grades, I might even qualify for partial scholarships." "Whoa, hold on there," my father interrupted. "Let's think about this rationally." What followed was a barrage of arguments against my going to college. They talked about the real-world experience I'd miss out on, the student debt I'd accrue, conveniently ignoring the funds specifically for my education, and how a degree didn't guarantee success. "Look," my mother said, her voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, "why don't you invest that money in our business instead? We're on the verge of a breakthrough with the eco-village. Once it takes off, we'll make sure you're set for life. You won't even need to work." As they continued their pitch, painting pictures of a luxurious future where I'd want for nothing, I found myself nodding along. But inside, a voice was screaming. I'd heard these promises before. I'd seen how they handled money, how they ran their business. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised even me, that they were lying. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. "I'm going to college. I'm going to live my own life, independently." The change in my parents was instant and terrifying. Their faces contorted with rage, all pretense of affection vanishing in an instant. "You ungrateful brat," my mother screeched. "After everything we've done for you." My father's voice was cold and threatening. "If that's how you want to play it, fine. You've got 6 months until college starts. See how you like living on the streets until then. We gave you a home," my mother cried, crocodile tears forming in her eyes. "We loved you, sacrificed for you." Something in me snapped. All the pain, all the disappointment, all the years of neglect came rushing to the surface. Loved me? I laughed bitterly. You didn't even want me to be born. I heard everything. How you never wanted me, how I was just in the way. How you pawned me off on grandma and grandpa because you couldn't be bothered to be real parents. The shock on their faces would have been satisfying if I wasn't so hurt and angry. Years of pent-up emotions poured out of me as I recounted every harsh word, every broken promise. You don't deserve to be called parents, I finished, my voice shaking. And I don't need you to kick me out. I'm leaving. With that, I ran to my room and started throwing clothes into a suitcase. I could hear them yelling, threatening, but it all seemed distant now. As I zipped up my bag, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I spent that night in a cheap motel, curled up on a lumpy bed, but feeling freer than I ever had. The next morning, I called Sarah, a colleague from the coffee shop who I knew was looking for a roommate. Hey, Sarah? Remember how you were saying you needed someone to split rent with? Is that offer still open? By the end of the day, I had a new place to live, a new phone number, and a new outlook on life. As I blocked my parents' numbers and social media accounts, I felt a mix of sadness and relief. This wasn't how I'd imagined my family story going, but it was the fresh start I needed. That night, as I lay in my new bed in the small apartment I now shared with Sarah, I thought about everything that had happened. I'd lost the family I'd always longed for, but I'd gained something more valuable: independence, self-respect, and the chance to build a life on my own terms. With a mix of excitement and nerves, I sent off my college application. I'd chosen one of the best schools in the country for business management, hoping to honor my grandfather's legacy. The waiting was excruciating, but finally, the letter arrived. As I tore open the envelope, my heart pounding, I saw the word I'd been dreaming of: congratulations. I'd been accepted. In that moment, I felt my grandparents' presence, almost as if they were there celebrating with me. When fall came, I moved into my dorm room, my few possessions reminding me of how far I'd come. I paid my tuition from the account my grandfather had set up, but I was determined to make my own way as much as possible. So, I found a job at a local coffee shop, putting my barista skills to good use. You don't have to work, you know, my roommate said one day as I rushed to make an early shift. You've got that inheritance. I smiled as I laced up my shoes. I know. But I want to. This is about more than money, it's about proving to myself that I can do this. College was challenging, but I thrived. Every business class I took, every late-night study session, brought me closer to my dream. I could almost see my grandfather nodding approvingly as I aced my exams and impressed my professors with my drive. 4 years flew by, and before I knew it, I was walking across the stage to receive my diploma. As I moved the tassel on my cap, I whispered, "We did it, Grandpa." Armed with my degree and the business acumen I'd gained, I dove into planning my own restaurant. I knew exactly what I wanted: a place that would honor my grandfather's memory and bring joy to people the way his restaurant had. I named it Giorgio's, after my grandfather. Using the photos I'd carefully preserved, I recreated the warm, retro-style interior that had made his place so special. Every detail, from the worn wooden bar to the vintage light fixtures, was a tribute to him. The first year was tough. There were nights I lay awake, worrying about bills and customer numbers. But I persevered, channeling my grandfather's determination and my own hard-won resilience. Slowly but surely, word spread. People fell in love with the atmosphere, the food, the story behind the place. 5 years after opening, Giorgio's was not just profitable, it was the talk of the town. I thought about my parents then, as I sometimes did. I'd seen them around town a few times, looking older and worn. Their eco-village dream had fizzled out long ago, I'd heard. Part of me felt a twinge of sadness for what could have been, but I knew I was better off without them. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd built it with my own 2 hands, with the love and support of my grandparents as my foundation. As I looked around the restaurant, my restaurant, I felt a deep sense of pride and gratitude. I pulled out an old photo of my grandparents from my wallet. I did it, I whispered to their smiling faces. I hope I've made you proud. As I locked up and stepped out into the cool night air, I felt a peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but every hardship, every obstacle had led me here. I was Monica, granddaughter of Giorgio, owner of Giorgio's restaurant, author of my own story.